I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me today is Dr. Donald Morgan, Director of Psychological Services Clinic at Rutgers University Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Don, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here. Can you explain to us a little bit about the clinic in terms and kind of what its mission is, what it does?
Right. So the clinic is a training clinic, and it's part of the Graduate School of Applied and Professional Psychology, which we shorten to GSAPP, GAZAP.
Okay.
So if I say GAZAP, you'll know what I'm talking about. So the clinic is a training clinic which most university doctoral programs in clinical psychology have. Mm-hmm. And they combine service to the community, training of the graduate students, and education within the institution. So we teach, we supervise, and we do therapy services for people in the community and also at Rutgers, too.
Well, I know one of the things that I had seen on the website and understood is the fact that you all supervise, as you talked about, practicing student clinicians, clinical folk. How does that happen with regards to training somebody to become a psychologist or a therapist?
Yeah, so fortunately for us in psychology, people can start talking to another person and being helpful by being warm, empathic, understanding, and then as they learn more, they become more skillful and proficient. In neurosurgery, I always felt a little worried about, like, how do you learn to do brain surgery, you know, like. So anyway, we do that. We start out our students in their first year. They begin seeing a couple of patients under supervision. So every hour that they do therapy, they talk to a supervisor who's a licensed, experienced psychologist, and they get pointers, and they go over their video of the session, and they basically start teaching them how to do the work.
So when you say video of the session, so part of your teaching tool is to have the student be able to videotape and then provide feedback in terms of their approach, kind of what the situations might be, how they might then treat the patient.
Yeah, video turns out to be a really crucial teaching tool, and all of our patients agree to be video recorded, and we handle that according to all the standards of privacy protection, and those videos are destroyed right after that, and we make sure that it's kept private between the supervisor and the student, or a small group of supervisees. But that's really important. In the old days, people would write down everything that they said, or then they'd record it, audio recording. Sometimes we audio record.
So in this conversation, what services does the clinic provide? What are there major issues that you all see all the time? I mean...
Right, so it's a general service outpatient clinic where we see adults, children, couples, families, and groups. So we supply all those different kind of therapy services. The clinic approaches all of its services in a pluralistic fashion. Like, in other words, there are different orientations to therapy, and we teach all of them in our school, of the major modern therapy orientations. Psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral, family systems are the three main areas that we teach from. So the students may take a course in family therapy, and our clinic will get a family case for them, and a supervisor who's a family therapy expert, and they'll see the case, and they'll be taking a course and learning along the way, and then continue.
Are clinic services open to just Rutgers community, or is it open to the community at large?
Everybody. We actually do about 250 to 300 new cases a year, and we probably have 150 or so ongoing. So in any given year, we will have 500 patients that we work with. And probably 60% or more come from the community, maybe 70%, and 20 to 30% come from Rutgers. We take some of the cases that the counseling centers can't continue to see because they have a short-term model and they need to see people for 8 or 10 sessions. So we'll take, and we also have a lot of specialized programs I can tell you about in our clinic if you'd like to.
That'd be great.
To hear you. So we have a program for substance abuse, which is a state-of-the-art program headed up by an expert, an international expert in the area, who does the supervision, and we work with people with all kinds of substance problems, and it's a very successful program because it uses evidence-based, state-of-the-art kinds of therapies.
Okay.
We have a program that we partnered up with the New Jersey Center for Tourette Syndrome. People with Tourette syndrome, it's a pretty serious neurological condition with tics and lots of problems in regulating the body. Mm-hmm. So those folks, they need a clinic that understands what their particular problems are.
Right.
So the Center for Tourette's Syndrome in New Jersey funds and supports some of our people to train them in this area and then give therapy to the people with Tourette's. So that's a good model of a partnership between a private advocacy foundation
right.
and the university. We have other contracts with the Division of Youth and Family Services, the Intoxicated Driver Resource Commission, things like that, where they send people. And the good part about our clinic is that we can see people for low fees. We have a sliding scale
okay.
that goes from $15 up to $80 a session, which is very reasonable compared to what fees are. Yeah.
Now, before the show, you and I were talking about the fact that your students also, and the clinic can also offer services in different languages, which is also a lot of community outreach. Can you talk a little bit about that? I found that fascinating.
Yeah. Well, our school is arguably the top practitioner training program in the country. Mm-hmm. We give a Doctor of Psychology degree, which is designed for people to really learn how to be therapists. Right. We also have a PhD program that's designed for people to be clinical researchers and do therapy. But at any rate, students from all over the world seek out our program to come here and get trained to be a therapist. And we have the luxury of taking just amazing top mm-hmm. people from everywhere. And we have a real commitment to diversity, so we want students who bring their own cultural, uniqueness, and it enriches the program amazingly. So in any given year, we've had students from Turkey, China, Iceland, South America, the Caribbean. So we've had therapy being done in Creole, French, Spanish, German, Chinese, Turkish. It's quite remarkable, and the patients in New Jersey is the most diverse state in the union. So here we are.
I want to jump a little bit more from the clinic to you. I want to talk about. I want to hear about how you have been influenced by Eastern cultures in terms of your practice and kind of how you approach your practice.
Thanks for asking about that, because it's very important to me. I had always been interested in yoga and meditation and became a yoga teacher back in the 70s, started practicing meditation from mm-hmm. the yogic tradition, and thought, how am I going to integrate this into being a therapist? Right. Because the yoga perspective pays attention to mind, breath, and body, and spirit, but for purposes of therapy, how could we use all the wisdom that came from this ancient tradition? Mm-hmm. And the answer that I found was people who really had been doing this and had been writing books and teaching about integrating yoga into psychology, psychiatry. So I studied with them for a lot of years and have been working with patients always from an integrative perspective in the way I work, psychoanalytic, cognitive behavioral work, and this wisdom from the ancient traditions comes up every day in what mm-hmm. I do. I can tell you some ways that might work if you'd like.
Well, and it's great because before camera we were talking about the idea of self-regulation and kind of, you had already talked a little bit about the idea of paying attention to breath, heart rate, those kind of things. So
right.
Can you talk a little bit how you use that? Because I think that kind of ties into what you just talked about a little bit.
Yes, it does. For whatever suffering people are undergoing, from their life stresses and their childhoods and whatever, it often boils down to, can you tolerate strong feelings that you're going to have? We can't make them go away. So we can minimize anxieties and depression, but sometimes you have those feelings. And the Eastern tradition is very interesting because it says you can accept what is. You can accept what you're feeling now. You may not like it, and you may want it to discontinue. Right. Who wants to be anxious or depressed? But something about starting with that acceptance of now, of what is part of the wisdom from that tradition. And then how to regulate that, how to work with the body and the breath and the mind to keep the system at its optimum functioning. So we teach relaxation for the body. There's lots of ways to relax your muscles and get rid of tension.
Well, let me go back to a second, because when you say the system at maximum regulation, or are you talking about your body overall, your mind and body? Because I kind of...
Right.
Because when you talked about that, I was thinking, I wasn't sure I understood the making sure the system's all together. Are you talking?
Right, the system being our totality of, mind, body, breath. And so the yogis found that you could intervene on the body level and learn how to relax the body. You could intervene on the breath. The breath is a great regulator of the nervous system as you breathe.
Oh, okay.
And if most people don't breathe properly, so there's a lot of dysregulation. Mm-hmm. And then the mind. What are you thinking? How are you creating your world? What are you paying attention to? So they teach meditation and focus and concentration. So there are a lot of interesting techniques that came out of these yogic and Buddhist traditions. Mm-hmm. And they've been researched now by laboratory studies, and we see that when you learn how to regulate the breath, if we hook up biofeedback instruments, which I do, simple things can help you to learn how to take away anxiety and physical tension by learning how to regulate the breath.
So let me ask you a question. So for you, it seems very personal. It seems kind of one of those things that's very interesting. How do you teach that to a patient, or how do you teach that to a student who's learning to apply that or trying to study that to work with patients?
Yeah, it's a good question, because unless you know it yourself, you can't dabble in that and just say, oh, you go do some breathing. Like, you have to know it. So I teach the students. I've from time to time teach a course in this, but I teach them in our supervision too how to do these practices. And you know, more and more now, students come to us who have been studying yoga and learned a lot of this already. So they're very good at it. And then they can sit with a patient and say, look, I do this, and I know that if you regulate your breath, if you watch the mind and learn how to do this meditation, you're going to feel better. You're going to feel more in control of yourself. We can put little biofeedback instruments on now that it's gotten so refined and so simple to show the people how their heart rate changes and how their muscle tension changes and how even their brain waves change when they do these practices, and they can see that it makes them feel better.
I'm fascinated by this all. I mean, I think you're doing some great work, and I want to thank you for being here today. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. So
appreciate it.
No problem. We'll be right back. Joining me today is George B. Stauffer, Dean of Mason Gross School of the Arts and Professor of Music History at Rutgers, New Brunswick. George, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here.
Why don't we first start out by having you kind of give an overview of the mission of Mason Gross.
The mission of the Mason Gross School of the Arts. We're very proud of the Mason Gross School of the Arts. It's Rutgers' most selective undergraduate school, and we have a dual mission. The first facet is to train students in the traditional manner. We're very committed to conserving the arts, to giving our students a very solid background, very solid training with some of the most distinguished artists in the New York, New Jersey area. But at the same time, we want to be different than many conservatories by having our students embrace the 21st century and the challenges of the arts in the 21st century. It's a rapidly changing field. So for instance, we want our students to be conversant with technologies that they're going to encounter and to be prepared for what's actually happening in the arts rather than what happened in the 19th century.
Now, when you use technology, you're using technology for both music, for theater, for all the arts in general?
Yes, for all the arts in general, and maybe a good example of Mason Gross was the video we did with the rapper Jay-Z for Super Bowl 44. Our orchestra went and performed as his backup group in a video that he filmed for Super Bowl 44 last year. And this involved modern collage technique where they're juxtaposing photos of football players and orchestral players and of Jay-Z himself. And it was really a marvelous production. And that's the kind of cutting-edge thing that we like to do and we aspire to.
Now, when you start to look for the next 3 or 4 years or even 5 years, what are some of the goals that you have for the school that you really want to accomplish?
Our goal is to constantly push up the quality. We want ever greater excellence, striving and moving forward. We're also about to break ground on a new building, which will give us a new performance space and an atrium for bringing students together so that they can meet and talk and discuss collaborations. And also we're expanding, especially in the area of filmmaking.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit how you recruit your students. Students aren't just from the New York and New Jersey area, they're from globally. So how do you all attract students to your school?
Yes, we're very proud. Our graduate students come from 22 countries, and our undergraduates come from 36 states. The incoming undergraduate class included 30% out of state,
wow,
which is a very high percentage. The arts are a bit like athletics. The bottom line recruiting factor are the teachers. So students will come to Rutgers, will come to Mason Gross to study, for instance, with C.J. Chang, who is the principal violist of the Philadelphia Orchestra. I mean, C.J. is arguably the best orchestral violist in the United States. And so students in California will see his name on our roster and decide that's where they want to come. So it's very heavily dependent on one-on-one relationships with faculty.
Now, one of the things that folks may not be aware of is you have some very distinguished alumni.
We do.
And so do you want to kind of just give us some overview of a few of the alumni who graduated from there?
Sure. Our theater department's probably the most famous nationally, so we have Callista Flockhart and we have Kristen Davis. I just had breakfast with Roger Bart, and we bring these alums back to meet with our students, to coach them, to counsel them, to give them some idea about the realities of the profession.
Right.
And that serves both as a role model and then also as a networking opportunity for our students.
One of the things I love about your background is that I think that you're a great role model for not just your faculty and your students, but you're a musician yourself. You're a renowned musician, and so can you talk a little bit about your background and how you became interested in the instrument that you play?
I always had split interests. On the one hand, instrumental study. I played piano when I was a boy, and then I was smitten by the pipe organ, and so I became an organist, and I worked at Columbia University for 22 years as their director of chapel music and university organist. But on the other hand, I love research. And so there's a research component to my background, a PhD in musicology and music history, and I continue to do archival research, and recently discovered a new Bach source down at Princeton, believe it or not.
So do you get a chance to play internationally now, or are you more focused on your research?
I'm focused mostly on administration. So I play when I can. I play for my Bern seminars, but no, I don't have time to really practice to give concerts at this point, though I hope to go back to it. I'm editing the complete organ works of J.S. Bach, the first American complete works edition at the moment, so I have a hand in that. And I continue to do archival research during summers and breaks, so I maintain a hand. I think that faculty have to remain active. If they're not active, then they don't really have their pulse on the profession, and I think they have to demonstrate to students that this is how it's done.
Right. Now, you've talked a little bit about your research around Bach. Can you tell us a little bit about your interest in that and how you kind of got led to really being excited about
Bach is a terrific role model. He's a role model for musicians. He's a role model for academicians. He's really a role model for administrators because more than any other musician, he single-handedly raised the bar, the expectations. Up until Bach, the expectation was that a reasonably good musician could sight read material. You would see a new keyboard piece, you could sit down, you could play that keyboard piece straight off. And Bach's works were the first ones that really required very rigorous training. So for instance, the Well-Tempered Clavier. That's the standard. Every keyboard player now plays the Well-Tempered Clavier. But in Bach's time, that was played uniquely by his students and his students alone, because they were the only ones in Europe who could manage to get through it because of the training.
Okay.
And Bach worked out a systematic method of training for his own students, and that's really become the basis for conservatory training today. So the earliest conservatories, the Paris Conservatoire, and in Leipzig, the conservatory there, were based on a Bachian technique and Bachian training. But as an administrator, Bach continues to inspire. His portrait's right over my desk at Mason Gross because of his unending quest for perfection. It was never good enough. It always had to be taken to that next level. And Bach died revising a small chorale prelude on his deathbed that he felt had to be absolutely perfect. I mean, with the idea of presenting that chorale prelude to God.
Wow. So let's ask this question then. How has Bach inspired you as an administrator? It sounds definitely like he inspired you as your musician.
Well, for instance, at Mason Gross, we debrief on everything.
Okay.
Administratively. So, for instance, we had a reunion in New York on Monday. It was at the Alvin Ailey Dance Theater. It was quite successful. We had a lot of alums coming. But next week we will sit down and we will go over that top to bottom and say, this worked, that didn't work, this needs to be improved slightly. And we do that on everything. And in a sense, that's inspired by Bach, who went back over his own pieces and little by little would lift them to an even higher level. Bach's greatest masterpiece is the B minor Mass, and I had the privilege to work with that piece for about 4 or 5 years while writing a book, a monograph on the B minor Mass. And the B minor Mass is almost entirely recycled music. Bach went back over his own music, took the very best pieces, and then refined them even further.
Oh, wow.
In many cases, distilling them, taking just a torso, just this section, because this section was the very, very best. And it's an inspiration for all of us, this idea of trying to take everything to the highest possible level.
I had no clue about that. That's great. So I'm kind of fascinated by you just kind of go back and you recycle it, and it comes out to this amazing kind of piece of music for everybody that's everybody knows.
Right. And administratively, we do this, for instance, with materials, with publicity materials. We're constantly going back over them, trying to push them up yet another notch. So it does translate. It does translate.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you talked about the filmmaking perspective and a digital making perspective, the new division within the school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Part of embracing the new arts in the 21st century and the new avenues for exploration in the arts has been developing divisions at Mason Gross. So the Mason Gross School consists of 4 departments: dance, music, theater, and visual arts. But we've also started now 4 divisions. And they're the Brodsky Center for Innovative Print and Paper. That existed, but it's now under the umbrella of Mason Gross. But then we started 3 additional divisions. Arts Online, for online instruction. We're the largest provider of online instruction at Rutgers. And this is very exciting because it's global. We have a global faculty. They have faculty meetings on Skype globally. Then we started an extension division for the education, arts education of children and adults. And we just started over the summer the Rutgers Center for Digital Filmmaking. And this consists of a certificate program, so Rutgers students may now major, so to speak, or have a major component of filmmaking in their education. They can register for certification and then take a set number of courses. Then it also consists of a filmmaking bureau where we will produce films for the sciences and the humanities at Rutgers, and then also it will have a Rutgers film archive where we will archive all the footage so it's available. And this is headed by Dina Seidel, whose film Crossing the Atlantic has created quite a stir at Rutgers, and nationally. It's aired nationally on public television. And we're very excited about this latest component of Mason Gross.
One of the other things that's fairly well known is the Opera Institute. Can you tell us a little bit about the Opera Institute?
Sure. We've wanted to launch a real opera program for some time. We have a number of faculty members who are in opera and who perform in opera, especially Eduardo Chama, who performs at Glimmerglass in San Diego and elsewhere. But it wasn't properly focused.
Okay.
And we received a major gift from Victoria Mastrobuono 2 years ago of $7.2 million, and a large portion of that was earmarked for opera. Victoria was a devotee of opera and very much wanted to spur a program here at Rutgers. So we started last year an Opera Institute, and this will be a program within the music department that offers graduate study in opera.
Wow.
And it will produce 2 main stage productions a year and then gradually add on to that, and little by little we're adding faculty to that program. So we've hired Faith Esham, who's a internationally known soprano in New York, and we've also brought on board Nancy Gustafson, an internationally known soloist. She's performed at La Scala and other places. And we also formed an alliance now with the Castleton Music Festival, so that our students, by enrolling in the Opera Institute, can then audition and go to the Castleton Music Festival, and that's run by Lauren Mazel, the former music director of the New York Philharmonic. And our first students went last summer, and so we had Rutgers students singing under the baton of Lauren Mazel.
That's amazing.
At the Castleton Festival. It's an extraordinary opportunity for Rutgers students.
Well, George, you and your faculty are doing some great things, and I'm so glad you were here today to tell us about that.
Well, Bill, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate that. Well, that's all we have for this show. For more information about subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at Rutgers TV. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies and the staff here at Breakfast at the Barracks, I'm Bill Leipold, and thanks for watching.